Renewed tensions on the Korean Peninsula, this time along the border between the North and the South. The DPRK blew up a joint liaison office used for inter-Korean talks. Why would Pyongyang do that? Joining me for discussion is Dr. Ivan Eland, a senior fellow at the Independent Institute, currently in the U.S. state of Florida, and Professor Su Hao, director of the Center for Strategic and Peace Studies at China Foreign Affairs University. Gentlemen, welcome to the program. Let's look at the claims of the DPRK first. Pyongyang said they blew up the liaison office because a group of defectors in the south used balloons to send anti-Pyongyang propaganda pamphlets north of the DMZ. That, among other things, means that the south has broken their agreements on starting a, quote, a new era of peace. Pyongyang also said that they're not happy with the fact that the south is siding with the U.S. over DPRK sanctions. Professor Su, how do you look at the DPRK's claims?
Yes, well, actually, I would say that the situation has been changed recent days because, in the last year, actually almost 1 year before, so there's a good process over the Korean Peninsula and across the Northeast Asia. Not only is the Chinese President Xi Jinping visits the Pyongyang, so there's totally changed. The normalized relationship between China and North Korea. And of course, South Korea and North Korea had been at the summit. And in particular, American President Trump visits the Parliament Jones and has the summit between United States and North Korea. So the situation seems to me goes on bright. But unfortunately, 1 year later, it seems that nothing happened from the South Korea and from the United States. So North Korea hope that after the summit, so they hope that's the good process, so that North Korea have to good environment, economic environment in particular, to develop themselves, so they can get assistance from outside of the world, and in particular gets sometimes the partially change over the sanction of the United Nations, right. So that creates good phenomena for the North Korea. But unfortunately, so far something happened to make the North Korea unsatisfied. Okay.
Right. Dr. Eland, what do you think of the DPRK's rationale of blowing up the liaison office?
Well, I think it's a bit thin. I mean, if they wanted to do something, they could do what they just threatened to do, was send some balloons with leaflets over in South Korea. So it was kind of a drastic action. I think the real problem here is that they're trying to deal with is there's not much time for the U.S. election, and I think they think perhaps that President Trump is not going to be reelected, and they're trying to put maximum pressure on him to get as many concessions in reopen the negotiations and get as many concessions from him as they can. Also, the South Korean leader's term is not for, is running out as well. So I think it has mainly to do with the U.S. election and the fact that North Korea doesn't like to be ignored. And of course, you have the pandemic, you have the worldwide economic problem because of the pandemic, and you have also other issues creeping up and has pushed the Korean issue off the table in the U.S. and elsewhere in the world. So I think North Korea wants to do this to get attention and say, listen, we want negotiations to resume and we want concessions. Right.
How do you think this will affect the ROK, the Republic of Korea's attitude towards Pyongyang? Because we know that South Korean President Moon Jae-in has been very insistent on facilitating U.S. DPRK dialogue, inter-Korea dialogue. He said after this incident that it is imperative that North Korea return to the negotiating table rather than return to the past period of confrontation by cutting the communication and raising tensions. I said it is, the hope of 80 million Korean people. The tide of cooperation cannot be reversed. How do you think the ROK will respond accordingly?
Well, I think the ROK will continue its policy, and I think
Yeah, Dr. Eland, first of all, go ahead.
Who's the question for? Oh yeah, I think the ROK will continue its conciliatory policy because the president there, President Moon, is committed to that. But I think, and also I think the Trump administration does not want any blow up with the North Koreans during an election year, because it will highlight the fact that Trump did this photo op early on, and it was nothing more than really a photo op with the North Korean leader, because I don't think this issue is going to be solved, frankly, because I think North Korea is a nuclear power and the United States is probably going to have to at least implicitly recognize that. So I don't see anything really changing on that, but I think the Trump administration does not want a blow up of relations during an election year. Most countries go easy on things during a U.S. election year because there's a temptation for the president to use a foreign intervention, a military intervention of some sort, to get reelected. But in this case, the North Koreans are taking the opposite approach of being belligerent, because I think they think that their time is running out to get any concessions they can from Trump.
Professor Su Hao, please go ahead. What do you think? How do you think the ROK will respond, and how will this incident impact inter-Korean dialogue?
Well, actually, South Korea is a real pioneer promoter for the reconciliation between North and South, and between the United States and North Korea. But unfortunately, later on, even though South Korea wants to take the active role to promote economic interaction between North and South, but they was constrained by the United States. So South Korea do nothing to assist North Korea regarding its economic development. So this reason why North Korea takes some kind of sanction or some kind of hostile action against South Korea. So that sends the signal to the South that South Korea have to make the pressure on the United States to change the attitude towards North Korea and to create this new phenomenon to assist North Korea regarding its economic and social development.
Well, Professor Su, Dr. Elan just said that this move can serve as, Pyongyang's, intention to catch attention, catch global headlines in the run-up to U.S. presidential elections, to reassert its presence. Do you agree with that assessment?
Somehow, yes. At the moment, the United States is not very much, concerned about North Korea, because they could focus on the internal problem or regarding its general election this year. So North Korea was ignored by the United States. So this time, North Korea want to do something so that provoke the attention, not only from the South Korea, but also from the United States. But I think that at the moment, President Trump is not very much, concerned about South Korea. So I don't think United States will take something, change its attitude towards North Korea.
Well, let's talk about China's role in the Korean Peninsula peace process. China's foreign ministry said on Tuesday that as a close neighbor, China always remains committed to sustained peace and stability on the Korean Peninsula. We know that DPRK leader Kim Jong-un visited China 4 times since March 2018. But there are always skeptics. I myself was in Washington for 8 years, and there are a lot of Western skeptics saying that China didn't do enough to rein in North Korea's, the DPRK's nuclear programs. Professor Su, do you agree with that assessment?
Well, that's 1 year ago, last June, our President Xi Jinping visited Pyongyang. So that's a historical event. So that means China and North Korea have to recover our blood commented, brothers with each other. So that means China ready to assist North Korea by means of economic assistance, financial assistance. But the problem is that the United Nations sanctions resolution so constrained the Chinese way to give the help to North Korea. And of course, the same as the South Korea. So that means without the American improvement of their change, their United Nations resolution. So South Korea and China can do much more to assist North Korea. So the reason why at the moment North Korea wants to do something to make the pressure on the South. But from China's side, I would say that we are still close neighbor with North and South Korea. So we want to try to persuade North and South Korea to self-restrain by themselves, to put, to somehow to contain, their own situation,
right.
so that prevent the production furtherly.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, right. Professor Eland, how do you look at the role of China in facilitating inter-Korean dialogue and in resolving the DPRK nuclear crisis?
Well, I don't think China has an incentive to have a war on the Korean Peninsula, and I think that China is probably a bit uncomfortable with North Korea's nuclear arsenal. But on the other hand, I suppose China could have enforced sanctions better earlier. But of course, China does not want the North Korean regime to implode or send a lot of refugees across the border there. So China has to walk a line between facilitating the talks, which is in their interest, but also not put so much pressure on North Korea that the whole North Korean regime goes down, because I don't think China wants that either. So, like I said, I think this is somewhat of an intractable problem. I think the United States should aim to limit North Korea's nuclear program rather than keep demanding that they get rid of the weapons, because they're not going to do that. But I think you could constrain their long-range missile capability. You could constrain the number of warheads they have. Mm-hmm. So I think a more limited negotiating agenda would help out. You could actually, and I think China would also have a better chance of mediating some sort of a limited agreement to limit North Korea's nuclear weapons, and perhaps then, some of the sanctions could be lifted and North Korea could have more prosperity as well, which would be good for everybody.
Dr. Eland, talking about the U.S., let's rewind a little bit. 2 years ago, President Trump met with Kim Jong-un in Singapore. The two leaders met again at the DMZ on the Korean Peninsula. What has those meetings actually achieved? We have about 1 minute.
Well, nothing really. I think it was a photo op for Trump, but it was also a photo op for Kim Jong-un. And people in the United States criticized it as saying, well, usually the negotiations are done in private and you build up to a summit where they just sign something and have a photo op. But the photo op came before that. And I think that's why it hasn't really achieved very much, because you really have to work hard at these negotiations. And I think something could have been done, but I think it was mishandled by the Trump administration. And I think, the North Koreans are the North Koreans. And so, really nothing's happened. And I think at this point, Trump is just trying to avoid a blow up before the election. And I think that's why Kim is rattling the saber a little bit here to see if he can get some concessions.
We'll see how things evolve in the weeks and months ahead. Thank you so much, Dr. Ivan Eland and Professor Su Hao.